James Lee's gun, or that man's gun, we don't know if that man is James Lee or not really. Police Officer Jay just had his first ever on-screen fight in the series over the course of the last 2 chapters, and I figured we are most likely not gonna see this guy fight again for at least another 50 chapters knowing PTJ, so why not make a video on how strong he is right now. In his fight against Police Officer Jay, after finally remembering who Jay actually is, Kingmaker Jay, Tom Lee outlines that sometime in the past, reporter Kim asked him to look into a big shot. We don't know who this big shot is, this is just PTJ building up suspense, but if I had to place my bets on somebody, it'd be one of the higher ups in the Young Ho party that also happens to be a fighter strong enough to have trained and virtually raised Police Officer Jay according to Tom, and part of this person's plan apparently is to have sent Police Officer Jay at Tom Lee, which is what makes me sort of confused as to who they're talking about in this part. Is it James? Is it someone else from the Young Ho party also currently pulling some strings and helping James Lee against the workers? What exactly is happening here? But anyways, we find out in this fight that Jay actually has 3 masteries, and you may think that's a nothing burger because 3 mastery users in Lookism vary significantly in strength, but I beg to differ. The current weakest 3 mastery user in Lookism would be Gongseop, and the strongest is James. Something also tells me that James doesn't have 4 masteries yet, not sure what it is, it's just a lingering feeling that comes from Jay's astonished reaction to Tom having 4. But the reason Jay having 3 masteries actually does help us in determining how strong he is the fact that the gap between James and other 3 mastery users is because of the power creep device we call a path, and Gongseop being significantly weaker than the rest and even weaker than some 2 mastery users is because the guy's crippled and can't exactly use the technique he got accustomed to in his prime properly anymore. As for Jay though, he has technique, strength and speed. All 3 you can imbue into an attack, unlike something like endurance for example. So let's go over his stats from what we know based on his fight with Tom. I'm going to assume he's in Captain Korea form here and has his shield and all his gadgets just because that's the strongest we've seen him so far, which by the way, his performance against Tom wasn't nearly as bad as people are making it out to be. Sure, Tom was holding back up until that unique skill, but that is still Ultimate King Tom, and it's not like Jay got his ass handed to him. Let's go over the sequence of the entire fight while scaling his stats. First of all, strength. His greatest strength feat so far obviously doesn't compare to anything Tom's done. Jay hasn't shown us a single named attack yet, and his strength feats are honestly kinda buns. Compare him to someone like Jay Gyeon, who's shown us multiple unique skills, with Death Kick being destructive as shit. He really doesn't hold a candle, but I don't think that's to Jay's fault. He's had to be on his back foot pretty much the entire fight with Tom, and he also somehow managed to make it out of the fight having dealt more damage to Tom than Tom did to him. Yes, you heard that right. Throughout their fight, Jay only got hit with 1 attack from Tom, which I'm going to attribute to a bunch of other stats for Jay that we'll go over after strength, but after the 4 mastery attack Tom landed on Jay, which Jay also dodged by the way, no other attacks landed from Tom. I don't want to get ahead of myself though, so we'll go over that shortly. Jay on the other hand actually landed a barrage on Tom that forced Tom to activate endurance mastery. Nonetheless though, it seems to have cracked Tom's skull open, which we can see from all this blood gushing from his head. So as for strength, his best feat would literally just be cracking Tom's skull open with the shield barrage, which isn't bad because Tom is extremely durable. Now when it comes to speed, this is where it gets impressive. Throughout his fight with Tom, not only is Jay able to react to every single attack Tom throws, that's right, every single one is either dodged or blocked, but he also blitzes Tom. He catches him off guard multiple times, and that's actually the reason he's able to land some of the attacks he does, even though those attacks don't do much damage. But that barrage that I was talking about earlier was actually facilitated by Jay blitzing Tom. He uses a kick to distract Tom, and then there's no other way to put it, simply just moves too fast for Tom to be able to react and ends up behind the guy, barrages him and forces out his endurance mastery, and when Tom tries to hit him back, he blocks the punch in the headbutt with his shield and then dodges the unique skill extremely easily. So yeah, speed wise this guy is cracked. Technique wise, not so much though. We don't see much of Jay's technique mastery, and part of me thinks the only reason he was given technique mastery was for the sake of the plot. PTJ wanted to show the difference between 3 masteries and 4 masteries via this fight here, thus he'd have to give Jay 3 masteries, and he didn't want to give him endurance or any of the other miscellaneous masteries, so he gave him technique. We need to see more showings of Jay's technique and why he has mastery in it. His threshold could be very low, but I doubt that's the case. But for now, I'm not even gonna bother trying to compare this to anyone else's technique or scale it anywhere because I don't want to waste my time or yours. Endurance, not great. Actually terrible. However, he does work around it in a very impressive way. After realizing he's no match for Tom at all and can't afford to take his attacks head on because he is literally going to explode, we're talking one holding back punch from Tom ripped half of his face off, he decides to use the shield to block everything. This however is not attributed to his endurance or durability, it would be accredited to his battle IQ, so in terms of endurance, we don't see much. As I mentioned earlier, he takes only 1 attack to the actual body from Tom. That was an attack that grazed him at that, and it rips his face open. For all we know, he could be fragile or the attack could have just been extremely powerful. Zero substance here. All we know is that he doesn't have endurance mastery. Experience. Now this part is actually slightly vague because there's multiple interpretations you can have for this. It all entirely depends on what Tom means when he says back in the past. My current interpretation of this is that in the past, potentially the first generation, as we know Jay is a first generation fighter, Tom found out about Kingmaker Jay, and that's the time period he was an active fighter in. Early first generation, potentially peak first generation, which if so, it would make sense that James picked him up and made him his right hand man around the time he ended the first generation. Since we don't have too much other information about this guy's experience, I'm gonna assume based on him being a first generation fighter that his experience would be relative or likely slightly less than high tier first generation kings, as he clearly cares less about fighting than they do. He's the exact opposite of Kite, who cares only about fighting. Jay actually cares about authority and that kind of stuff, hence their opposite titles, Kingslayer and Kingmaker. Alright, now for battle IQ, extremely impressive shit here. He realizes in the fight with Tom after being grazed by a singular holding back punch that he's not built for this, and that he can't be taking Tom Lee's attacks head on or tanking anything because he's going to die, as we mentioned earlier, and decides to rely on tricks and tomfoolery, no pun intended, to deal damage to Tom. And via that strategy, he lands more hits on Tom, doesn't get hit by a single attack from Tom, and lasts 2 minutes and 4 seconds with Tom, which in Lookism is a lot more profound than you think it is, because fights don't usually last long in this series. After taking that first hit, he pushes Tom away from him with some sort of flip kick, and then jumps at him and is literally 2 steps ahead. He jumps at Tom, making him think he's actually trying to attack him, but in reality he isn't. He gets behind Tom before Tom can react, which by the way was a perfect opportunity to get some extra hits in if you really wanted to. However, he aimed for something better. He then makes Tom think he's escaping by aiming for the motorcycle, but in reality he also wasn't doing that, and instead, taking into consideration how strong Tom's attacks are and what we mentioned earlier about him not being able to tank anything, he picks up the shield. Tom then shows him he's capable of cracking the shield, so Jay realizes he can't just stay on the back foot and block everything and stall Tom, because he will end up dying, so he goes on the offensive too. He sends Tom flying, outspeeds him again and again, attacking him 2 times before getting behind him and aiming for the head with that barrage, and he says it's working, it's definitely working. Blocks Tom's next attack and the one after, and then ends the fight by avoiding Tom's unique skill, having dealt more damage to Tom than Tom did to him, and stalled him for an extra 2 minutes and 4 seconds, which are going to be crucial when it comes to saving Roberto Kim's life. Now, when it comes to his overall placement, in reference to other 3 mastery users, he's obviously stronger than Gongseop. I think that one was a no-brainer. Gongseop is still the weakest 3 mastery user, potential man of the first generation kings, biggest what if, so on and so forth, but I'm going to place Police Officer Jay directly in between UJ and Jaegyeon. There's not much merit to really back this up. We can't exactly quantify how much stronger or weaker he is than anyone really, but I'm mainly placing him here because Jaegyeon's just shown us a lot more in comparison to Jay, which is why I can in good conscience put Jay above Jaegyeon. I can and will put him above UJ though, because even though UJ's shown us his deadly hand, Jay's back foot performance against Tom alone makes me think that if he didn't have to fight holding back the entire time, he would have at least one unique skill as well. Complete and utter assumption there though, but you get the gist. Around Jaegyeon and UJ level, not above Jaegyeon for now though, and I think if you put him anywhere in that range, it's acceptable.